Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about grains. And this is one of these topics that, people who are into fad diets, they're into a lot of things they bring up, and they're like, oh, well, grains are the cause of all these problems we have in the modern world. And it's just absurd to me that anyone draws this conclusion from the scientific literature. And it's usually because they're not looking at the literature. They like to use scientific words like inflammation, as if all inflammation is bad, and as if grains are even particularly inflammatory. They're really not. And look, I'm the first person to say that lean animal proteins, whether it's meat or dairy, and vegetables should be the foundation of your diet. And then, of course, I say that, based upon your needs, appetite, everything else, you can fill in, the remainder with other stuff, whether it's, fruits, grains, even nuts, depending on what your diet looks like. Although I tend to generally promote a higher carbohydrate diet. I personally function far better, train better on it, and so do most people. At the end of the day, isn't that what we're talking about? We're talking about training, being fit, and anyone who says they don't care about training so much, but they want to be really healthy is I'll be polite, they're very ignorant. They're clearly very, very ignorant, because lifting and strength training is one of the single most important things you can do for your health, and it's not my opinion. That's large amounts of scientific research on it at this point. But we come over to this idea that grains are bad, and then what people will bring up with grains is, well, okay, maybe whole grains are not so bad, but some people will say they are, like, or they are anti-nutrients. And, to some extent, some whole grains can be a little more problematic for certain things, generally good for weight loss. But, for some people, some gut irritation just due to the fiber, because they're not used to the amount of fiber, or it could be a problem with getting enough calories for some people. But for the morbidly obese, oats are not exactly a bad food choice. All right, let's be honest here. But then that's what certain crowds of people will say. But again, we need to understand that's not grounded in the research. Right? It's not grounded in the research. It's, again, pseudoscience. It's purely pseudoscience that people come up with, and it gets ridiculous. And because a few people with IBS can't handle large amounts of whole grains, and suddenly all grains are bad. Well, that's not how it works. Right? It's a fiber issue, and if we could argue with some of those people, large amounts of vegetables to a certain point are a problem. But what you need to understand, you don't lose the health benefits of these things. In other words, if you have a disease that makes it difficult to consume these fiber foods that have tons and tons and tons of health benefits, you're in a bad place. Okay, and then you've got to debate if, say, your IBS is a higher risk threat than eating a bad diet. Okay, and that's a very personal choice, because now you're in a situation where you can't eat an optimal diet for health due to your inflamed intestine. But a lot of that's more fixable than people think it is. Right? Try just getting used to more fiber. Quit doing stupid fad diets. Right? Problem solved. Quit trying to take 37 probiotic products without knowing what you were doing, which is basically everyone who messes with them. Right? There's your solutions. But yeah, people are then eating a deficient diet because of it. Then we come over to, well, it's the refined grains. And I'll see people discuss refined grains, and before long they're listing, well, cake or pie or whatever. And it's like, the refined grains in there are not the concern. What's really in these foods that we should be worried about? Large amounts of refined sugar. And I guess brought up too, well, corn's a grain, and the really, really, really refined version of it's high fructose corn syrup. We can put that back into refined sugars. That's not the same thing as a refined grain. Okay, to compare high fructose corn syrup to white rice or white flour, it's extremely intellectually dishonest. It really is. It's extremely intellectually dishonest. And you guys know it is, because we're back over to the refined sugars. But your issue there is not the refined grains, it's the refined sugar, all the vegetable oil, the butter, all this stuff you're adding to it. Butter is a refined animal fat, one of the worst things you could be eating. That one upsets people for some reason. The whole carnivore keto crowd gets really upset when you bring up that butter, when you look at research and blood work, is terrible. Like, if we want to talk about a junk food you shouldn't be eating, well, I eat the grass-fed butter. Well, don't bitch and complain when you have inflammation and atherosclerosis if you're chowing down on it. And that's not a knock at dairy fat per se. That's a knock at specifically a highly refined animal source fat, which you have stripped of its nutrients and you've broken down the contents into a different manner. Okay, butter is terrible for you. The data shows it. In fact, people say, well, actually, even margarine doesn't even seem to be as bad for you as butter. When we look at the data, to put that in perspective, and I'm not telling you to eat margarine, by the way. I'm not telling you to eat margarine. So again, people have these ideas, but then when you look at the cultures that actually eat these things in large amounts, they don't have the same health problems. I mean, and white rice is the perfect example. Look at any country in the world in the epidemiology to where white rice is a major staple. Do they have the same heart disease, diabetes, and cancer that we do? No. And that's a refined grain. It's one of the most common refined grains around the world, and yet its intake in a culture or a society or country isn't associated with these problems. What does that tell you? That maybe refined grains are not the issue? You know, and that's what's crazy about this idea. People eat junk food. That is why we are sick in America. We gorge ourselves on hyper-palatable, highly processed junk food. And then everyone wants to blame anything but the junk. Oh, it must be the grains. Really? You don't see that in the rest of the world. Oh, it must be the animal protein. Oh, it must be the vegetables. Okay. No society on earth has an obesity problem or a diabetes problem or any of these things who eats these foods. Guys, it's the refined fats and the refined sugars. All right? That's what's getting us. Quit putting refined sugars in things. Quit adding butter, vegetable oil, shortening. Quit adding all this stuff to your foods. Quit eating foods made with all this stuff in large amounts. It's not the grains. And there's no evidence that it is the grains. And it's just insane that people see people eating this junk food and in their head they're like, oh yeah, it's the grains causing it. Yet the epidemiology, the individual lab work, nothing else supports this conclusion. It's purely a stupid internet kook fad diet idea. Nothing more. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.